Welcome to Property Quorum. And now we are joined by the great good of the property universe, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, Michelle Carr taking the con out of construction, and of course Silas J Lees of WiggyWam. And we are here to discuss and throw comment on the changes and moves within the property workplace. Now, today is no different. Today's title is Blueprints and Bottlenecks, the Housing Reform Hustle. And we're going to review some of the housing reforms. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm going to throw under the bus immediately Hamish McClay.
Well, good morning all. Good morning all. And yes, some strange messages come through. And one of the challenges is who in actual fact is going to benefit from various changes which are coming. Now, I'm sure we've all heard of NIMBYs. In fact, there's so many acronyms that you can't figure out what the heck all of them mean. But many of them will actually recollect. I hope they've heard the word "not in my backyard." Now, of course, there's an awful lot of comment about sort of local people having a concern about sort of 200 houses sort of going on what was a farmer's field. And they're holding up apparently developments and all sorts of other things too, for that matter. And the government in its next move to try and speed up process is suggesting that it will take over overall responsibility for planning matters, rather than leaving it with the local government officers who themselves actually know much more about the local area. But there's an interesting article here. I subscribe to all sorts of interesting bits of publications of one sort or another. This particular one is called Wild Justice. And I'll just read this because this is very relevant. It says housing developers are failing to deliver the bat boxes, bird boxes, hedgehog highways, bug bricks, trees and wildflower meadows they promised. And cash-strapped local authorities don't have the time or resources to check up on what has happened. So are we just going to bulldoze through ancient head roads and sort of all the rest of it because the government thinks it's a good idea?
Wow. Well, that's a good opening salvo. Silas, what say you?
Well, I think it's a great observation, Hamish, that's raised there, and I'll just reflect on something which is not housing related necessarily, but the development of all these solar parks, which again, some bright sparks seem to think they need to go on greenfield sites when there is a very strong argument for putting them on the roofs of supermarkets and commercial buildings and even car parks, for example. So I do think there is this is a very interesting approach by the government to suggest they're going to centralise control and take it away from local governments, which I think is just a complete recipe for disaster. I don't see how you can effectively coordinate everything from Westminster, if you like, compared to having somebody on the ground in Wales or in Scotland or in England, for example. Each of the local towns, how do you coordinate all of that from one place? I can see it just being a complete nightmare.
It sounds marvellous. Michelle, please weigh in.
I mean, I agree with Silas, to be fair. I think you have to have, again, we've spoken about this many times about having experts, and ultimately, as much as council authorities can be difficult and take a lot of time, etc., you are dealing with people that know the area, they know the local area, they know the people, they know how the area works, they know the type of people, and ultimately you can go from one town to another within this country, and the ethos around that area is totally different, and you're never going to understand that from local government. But also, what I've never really fully understood is I know there's companies that don't pay attention to the rules, and none of the companies I've ever worked for, because we have had a lot of stress for around bats or around some nukes or whatever it may be that have held up construction projects for a long time. But I'm also aware that there are some companies, probably the bigger ones, and I've never worked with tier one, that just don't pay attention, just embarrass through. And I don't know whether people check up or not. I've had some very difficult projects with some difficult people where we've had to change lights because of a bat or something like that. It's been quite ridiculous and it costs a lot of money. But I'm also aware that the bigger companies probably don't pay much attention. I don't see how I don't think it is governed as well as it should be. I've had issues in my own estate where I live, where somebody decided to put a an order on a tree that we never wanted to get rid of, which now makes it difficult for us to get the tree pruned. And in these winds and these storms, it becomes quite dangerous because you have to get an application which takes months just to trim a tree to make it safe. So, and as a director of the road, I was conscious that if one of these big branches of this massive oak tree fell on someone in a children's play centre, that we were going to be in serious trouble. But because somebody thought it was a good idea to put a tree protection order on it, it took us 3 or 4 months just to get the authority to go. It's a catch-22. Yes, I think there are certain elements that need to be probably held up and make sure that people do cover their planning conditions and the requirements, etc. But then on the other hand, the more complicated you get, the longer things get, the more expensive it is. The more expensive the housing market is and to deliver those projects, the more expensive the houses are. And you've got a catch-22. The more processes you put through, the longer it takes, the increase in the cost of these houses.
Wow. Chris, how did this sort of thing affect you? Or is it the snowflake generation?
I don't think so, no. I do believe that the grassroots level is the way forward. So I'm quite concerned that like our panel has already said so far, I am quite concerned that the government thinks it's a good idea to try and consolidate power in these particular arenas. I'm not sure, as Silas mentioned, I'm not sure how a department far away is going to have any real resemblance of knowing what's going on the ground at that ground level. So yeah, this is fraught with danger. And are we 6 months down the line from the new government now? I'm seeing other repercussions in areas that we are highly interfaced at an arm's length, but still very much controlled by the actions of the central government, different departments in the central government. And it's been catastrophic what's been going on in those departments over the last 6 months. They seem to be very keen to rip up the rule book without actually realizing that they haven't replaced it with anything. So there's a lot of chaos that's going on in the wake of all the actions that the government, what seem like knee-jerk reactions that the government seems to be taking. It's almost impetuous in their behavior, in that they just want to be seen to be doing something different to the governments of the previous 12 years or so. And that's problematic in itself, in that without some sort of clarity in how they want us to behave, how they intend us to continue to do commerce, the ambiguity is causing serious amounts of repercussions, and that's translating into people, well, an impact on people's business, people's livelihoods, which is potentially an incendiary situation that leading us down. Because if you start playing with people's livelihoods and their ability to put food on the table, there's a problem.
Hamish, is it, as Chris is alluding to, a new broom swooping clean? Is that what's going on here?
Well, the trouble is, it's not exactly sweeping clean. This is the big challenge. It's almost like they've left the sort of tree stumps sort of all over the place, sort of type of touch, because there isn't sufficient clarity.
Well, no, they couldn't have done that. They would have had to get a special order first, as Michelle said, if they were going to leave tree stumps everywhere.
But the sad thing is, and Michelle alluded to this when she was saying too, do we have enough experienced members of the government in central government? Silas also sort of spoke of this. Do we have sufficient competence, experience within government departments to actually be able to speak fairly and reasonably for local communities? Bearing in mind that all of the politicians are pretty brand new into this particular arena, and the only thing that can be said, and they use the term sort of mandate, we have a government that's moved in that has a serious majority. So too did the Conservative government when they came in and managed to sort of wheedle that away. But they weren't quite as calamitous. At least they went over a period of time before they became unpopular. Whereas this particular sort of, it's the chopping and changing without. I think we do know this. So one of the great sort of laws of science, isn't it? Of course, every action taken has a sort of some kind of reaction. There are consequences to everything, and unfortunately, those consequences, our government actually hasn't been able to. It's a shame it's political, but unfortunately, it is, because there must be legal ramifications involved with this as well. We don't have Juliet with us today to actually make comment there, but there must be legal ramifications with some of the things that will happen. I mean, if central government is responsible for something, I mean, yeah, just to put a little development in perspective here, which a little development, there's several thousands of houses which are going up. I don't know how long it's going to take to get them all up there. But they started off, the very first move that they made was to rip down ancient hedgerows, which in fact had protection order on them along with trees. And the comment was, well, we could build more houses because we can only get fined a maximum of £100,000, and we can build 4 or 5 extra houses. And if you're paying sort of, 400,000 or 500,000, what the heck is 100 grand in all of that? So what are you going to do? Tell them to put the hedgerow back and take the houses down? The big builders win again, don't they?
Silas, I never actually before heard Newton's second law being compared to the property market, but I'll take it. In your opinion, is it the fact that because this current government's been in opposition for so long, they've forgotten the basics?
I think that's an excellent observation, Gareth, and something that Chris just touched on there is, I think, what's driving or going to be one of the biggest obstacles in the government's way in terms of delivering one of their promises here, and that is overall confidence in the economy. And I think there is a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of people looking on in horror watching this what appears to be a train wreck unfolding.
Slow motion car crash, yes.
Yes, very much so. And that affects people's confidence, and it's confidence really that drives the overall property market. And it's fine saying we're going to build all these houses, but if nobody's prepared to buy them, it's no longer profitable to build. And that's really where we've seen, I think, this dynamic unfolding over the last sort of 20, 30 years in the property market, is that when we have a recession like we had in 2008, a lot of developers mothballed all of these projects. They weren't prepared to build. And so is that same process about to unfold here in the marketplace? I'm seeing signs that it is, and that, of course, just stalls any kind of future housing development. So these delays where we're behind in the number of houses that we need to build every year are continually compounded year on year. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that the government's creating at the moment, is a real lack of confidence in them and in the economic outlook.
Michelle, aren't there a vast number of brownfield sites available anyway? Why do we need to be looking at putting up solar parks? And you are on mute, by the way. Why do we need to be putting up solar parks on greenfield sites? It shouldn't be needed, should it?
Well, I mean, I have my concern, should we say, about the movement with electricity and other bits and pieces, and how eventually everyone's pushing to electric cars and reducing the use of gas and other things. And then ultimately, when everyone's depending on electricity, what's going to happen? Electricity prices are going to go through the roof again. So that is one concern. The other concern I have about all of this is, yes, there are brownfield sites. However, what you have to do with those, and if depending on the circumstances, they're like some of the brownfield sites, for example, old industrial estates, a lot of them are built by rivers, because obviously years and years and years ago they would be using the rivers to transport. The problem with having housing by a river is the fact that there's flood risks, and the costs involved in building there are much, much higher than they would be in potentially a green belt where the land is soft or whatever. There's no issues. The other thing that worries me is that by having a centralized government in control of planning, they can be biased towards what plans they allow and what they don't. And ultimately, you're not going to have local people fighting for the local area to keep it the way it's supposed to be. If they've got a sponsor, should we say, that wants to build a massive housing estate in some old farmers' land, the farmer's gone bust because of all the tax and implications they've put on farmers. And all of a sudden, one of their mates is going to earn millions out of doing development that no one else will say yes to. And all of a sudden, the government says yes, and that's that. And by the time people have argued it, it would have been built. And I think these are the things that worry me, that having a centralised government making decisions, is the fact that local people, local authorities will not have any say in it, because they will put things up that they know full well everyone will go against them. And the answer for the local councils is, it wasn't us, it was main government, and they don't think the government will be overthrown. But there is a petition out there, I don't know if any of you have seen it, about holding a general election, and I think over 2 or 3 million people have signed it. Is going to be obviously heard. And I just think, regardless of whether you agree with the Labour government or not, what I think we need to do as people is turn around and say, actually, you work for us. The government is supposed to work for the people, not the other way around. And I think generally we need to oppose things and say, no, this is our government. We want our country running our way, what benefits us, not all of the big fat cats and the big business. And I think it's our opportunity, whether you are with Labour or not. Ultimately, they've gone against the manifesto in the first 6 months catastrophically. Most of the big things that they were voted in for, they've stopped, and then they've done other things that were never on the manifesto. And people need to stand up and say, no, hold on, you promised us something. Now you have to deliver what you promised. And I think it's a time that we stood up to that and said, as people, this is what you promised, and make them accountable for it.
Chris, may I come to you? Is it time for us to hold the government's feet to the fire as far as this sort of thing is concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. I was saying before, that the housing supply, it's there. It's actually potentially available. Or in each of the different local authorities have done extensive research, their planning departments, and developed a local plan to span over the next 20 to 30 years of what they're looking to do in these different areas. So they know where the supply of land and housing is going to be for the immediate future, for the next 5 years and the 5 to 10 years and beyond. It's all mapped out. The resolution would be for the government to commit to actually funding and retaining ownership of these sites. It's straightforward. Where's the urgency? Where's the demand? Go and cherry pick where you need to actually deliver first. It is there already, but the government needs to provide the funds and make the commitment.
Wow. Well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him think, it seems. Hamish, would you take us home?
Well, there's not a lot to take us home with this, because it's another matter which I feel we're going to have to watch unfold before we actually sort of see the total impact of what is going to happen. It's not something which is going to happen straight away. But one of the things that we do know, and this is a pet that Silas brings up from time to time, because he knows about these things, is the land banks. Now, saying to local government, because a lot of these land banks, they already have planning permission. They're just not actually building houses there. Now, that would actually open up more houses than putting pressure and sort of saying, oh, we're going to pass this, we're going to pass that. We couldn't really give a monkeys about the fact that it's a sort of conservation area without a label on it, because it hasn't been sort of fully investigated. And I think there are issues with centralizing some. We've already found this. I mean, when we actually start looking at, and I did mention an article I wrote earlier this week about Big Brother, is Big Brother appearing? Are we back to 1984? Look, land charges, which is a government department, the land registry, I should say, which is a government department, has taken ownership over of land charges already. That's part of the conveyancing process. Here we are now going to be stepping in. They're going to be looking into what they're going to do with decisions about planning. So what is going to come next? Where are they going to put the next bit of control and take it away from the residents that Michelle very sort of kindly pointed out that, hey, hang on, guys, you're here for the benefit of the residents of this country. We want them to be in safe houses, in the right places, of course. So there's a lot that needs to unfold. And I think, as Chris was indicating too, what we're seeing, there's going to be a slowdown because there isn't that level of confidence. And when you look at there's plenty of investment in energy at the moment. If you want to be safe with your money, bung it at energy, because as we well know, another wind farm, another solar farm, those are up for grabs, aren't they? And they'll get planning permission because it fits in with the old greenwashing spectacle that we've got, because that's another subject for another week about the greenwashing. In the meantime, I think we have to sort of say this: the subject is not an easy one to actually sort of come to any terms with at the moment.
No, it's interesting. We've touched on greenwashing. I've just received a new edition of 1984 in hardback, literally yesterday afternoon.
Wow.
Thank you very much for another one of my clients. I thought that was particularly apposite. And here we are talking about the government perhaps not listening to the needs of the people it's supposed to serve. Is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? We'll only see in the further analysis as time goes on. It only remains for me to thank our esteemed attendees, Hamish McClare of Search Convey, Michelle Carr of Taking the Con Out Construction, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, and of course Silas J Lees. And all of you, I urge you to hang back a little bit, wait till you see the whites of their eyes. We're going to get them to listen to us eventually. I think it's quite interesting, admirable, slightly scary, the fact that there is this petition to have another general election. I have no belief that it will do, but it's good to make these guys wake up and realize who's holding on to the lead of who. But until next time, I wish you all to just keep your feet on the ground, keep looking towards the stars, but at the same time, look after that mental health. Until next time, goodbye.